In this video we will discuss the concept of ocean acidification. So when we are saying ocean acidification, we call ocean acidification as the ongoing process of decrease in the pH of Earth's ocean, and this decrease in the pH of Earth's ocean is caused by the increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the ocean water. So this carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere, which then is getting absorbed in the oceans, is causing the decrease in the pH of the ocean water. So we will first understand what this pH is, then we will see how carbon dioxide is leading to decrease in pH, and finally we will see what is the implication of all this, right? So though the process is fairly chemical in nature, its impact is biological. So finally we will see that what is happening because of that. Fine. So pH is nothing but we call it as potential of hydrogen, or you can also call it as power of hydrogen. Fine. So there is a pH scale. It ranges from 0 to 14. There is a midway point at 7. If a pH of a substance is beyond 7, we call it as a base. If it is below 7, we call it as an acid. Fine. As we are saying that pH is potential of hydrogen or power of hydrogen. So one very simple thing which comes out of this is, as pH of any substance changes, to simply put is, the hydrogen ion concentration changes. So if higher is the hydrogen ion concentration of any substance, higher is the acidity, or low is the pH. So to simply put it, if you go from 7 to 0, the hydrogen ion concentration increases, right? So this is one simple fundamental fact about it, right? And we are very much concerned about this hydrogen ion concentration only because that is what is going to derive all the phenomenon or the biological impact of decrease in the pH or ocean acidification. Fine. So we have seen that pH decrease means increase in H plus ion concentration. Now the next question which comes is how we are saying that carbon dioxide, which is getting absorbed in the ocean water, is causing H plus ions to increase. So let us see that first. Now when Earth was formed, or when atmosphere was created, or oceans were there, let us see, this is atmosphere, right, and this is ocean. So this is surface of ocean, and through the surface of ocean it is in a continuous contact with atmosphere. Another important thing it does is, there is a continuous exchange of gases between atmosphere and ocean, right? So what happens is, ocean absorbs some gases from atmosphere and vice versa, right? So if there is CO2 in the atmosphere, at the formation of ocean and atmosphere, so it must have interacted with ocean water, it must have got absorbed in the ocean water, and finally after some million years they attained an equilibrium, right? So this ocean and atmosphere, or CO2 in atmosphere, they came into an equilibrium state, right? So this is part number 1. Before industrialization, the CO2 concentration in atmosphere was some 280 parts per million, and pH of ocean was, say, it was around 8.25, right? So if you can notice that ocean water is fairly basic in nature. Fine. Now subsequently, post industrialization period, CO2 concentration went up to 400 parts per million. Now, as we have seen that there is a state of equilibrium between atmosphere and ocean, right? So whatever concentration of CO2 was there in atmosphere, it was in equilibrium with that of ocean. As CO2 in atmosphere increases, obviously more CO2 would be absorbed by ocean as well. So as CO2 increases further, it gets added to ocean waters also. Fine. And as a result of that, we can see the pH of ocean water changes to some 8.14. Now, how this change is happening with the increase of CO2 is the next thing we will address. Now, we have seen CO2 concentration at 280 and pH at 8.25, and then CO2 concentration went on to 440 ppm and pH came down to 8.14. So let us see. So this is ocean water and this is CO2. So as CO2 comes in contact with water or is absorbed in water, it forms carbonic acid. Right. So this is H2CO3, that is carbonic acid. Now H2CO3 is unstable. It is very unstable, so it does not maintain the state of H2CO3. So further it splits into H plus ions and bicarbonate ions. So this H plus ions is released in ocean water, right? And we already have seen that whenever there is an increase in H plus ion concentration, acidity increases, fine, or pH decreases. And this one simple fact addresses this concern that at 280 parts per million concentration of carbon dioxide in atmosphere, the pH of ocean water was at 8.25, and as concentration of carbon dioxide went on to 400 parts per million, pH decreases to 8.14. So this simple chemical reaction addresses our concern of decreasing pH of ocean waters, right? So I hope you are fairly clear up to this part. Now let us address our next concern. So in very simple diagram you can see the chemical reaction, that there is atmospheric carbon dioxide CO2, it gets dissolved in ocean water, CO2 combines with water, forms carbonic acid, and it further releases a hydrogen ion, right? So this is part number 1. Now there are some animals such as, say, mollusks. So they form outer skeleton, and this outer skeleton is made up of calcium carbonate, or to be precise, there is a form of calcium carbonate called as aragonite. It is made up of that. Fine. So at, say, equilibrium, when we discuss the case of equilibrium of ocean waters, the concentration of calcium ions and carbonate ions is supersaturated. So when we are saying supersaturated, it simply means that calcium ions and carbonate ions are in abundance, right? So so the structure of mollusk is something like this. They are round and round and round, they grow. So at this tip they build themselves and they grow, right? So what they do is, this whole is made up of CaCO3, and to make this CaCO3, what they do, they absorb calcium ion from the ocean water, simultaneously carbonate ion from the ocean water, right? Now as it absorbs both of these, uh, creates calcium carbonate and extends their skeleton. So it goes on to extending like this, further, so on and so forth, right? Now this is one story, and when we are discussing the story is at equilibrium. When ocean and atmosphere are in equilibrium, the calcium ion and carbonate ion concentration is supersaturated and they are available in abundance to all these mollusk and shell forming animals to form their outer skeleton. Now as carbon dioxide concentration in the air increases, we have seen that it is also absorbed by the ocean water, and further as a consequence of which H plus ion concentration increases in the ocean water, that is acidification of ocean. Now this H plus ion is main culprit in the story, and it creates the further problem. So in earlier case of equilibrium, there were enough H plus ions which had combined with whatever available other ions are there, and there were enough calcium ions also and carbonate ions as well, right? So everything was in the state of equilibrium. Now when suddenly H plus ion increases, you can notice one thing, that this H plus ions has an affinity to take away these carbonate ions. This H plus ions and carbonate ion combines and forms bicarbonate ion, right? So when this bicarbonate ion forms, the carbonate ion which otherwise would have been available for the mollusks has already been taken away. Now tell me, in this condition, this particular mollusk would have one less carbonate ion to form its shell, right? So as it would have grown like this further, now there is like less possibility of this shell to grow any further, and that is why this H plus ion increase in the H plus ion concentration or the acidification of ocean creates a problem for biological life in the marine what we say marine ecosystem, right? So you can see here that this CaCO3 is something with which outer skeleton of shelled animals is formed, and it is formed by calcium ions and carbonate ions. But this culprit hydrogen ion, what it does, it takes away this carbonate ion and forms bicarbonate ion, and this bicarbonate ions by its very nature is very stable. Fine. So ultimately who suffers? The skeleton forming animals or skeleton forming marine animals are the ones which otherwise had an abundant supply of calcium and carbonate ions are now suffering because of ocean acidification. So this was all about ocean acidification. So there are like some more details, so let me show. Okay, so this is whole cycle of impact of ocean acidification. So as a result of ocean acidification, there is reduction in carbonate ions, loss of shells and skeleton, again coral bleaching and other threats, so on and so forth. So this is how ocean acidification works and affects the marine ecosystem.